Welcome to the Lawyer Life podcast, where the personal, professional, and political intersect. Each week, we discuss a topic to help ourselves and other lawyers navigate our days with a little less stress and ideally a lot more fulfillment. On today's episode, we talk to our guest, Catherine Chang, about belonging. We're asking ourselves, what happens when a lawyer feels they don't belong? And how can we help folks that are put in that position? I'm Mike Anderson.
And I'm Darlene Tonelli.
Hey, Darlene, little delay there, pal.
Little delay, yep, but we're good. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm okay, thanks. I'm excited for this conversation, as I always am when we have our illustrious guests.
I'm so excited for this conversation. There's a million reasons for it, but Catherine and I actually have a lot in common, which we will parse out through the chat maybe, but it's fun to have like a little kindred spirit a little bit.
Yeah, totally. Catherine's a kindred spirit for sure. Maybe you can tell the listeners about her.
What a great segue.
I'm getting better. I really do try hard.
Professional broadcaster Darlene Tonelli gets me to go to an intro. Okay, I will do it. Okay. Catherine Chang is an immigrant that moved from Jamaica to Canada at the age of 10. After earning her LLB, working as a lawyer, and spending her career managing student and alumni relations at a major Canadian firm, Catherine has built a unique understanding of the legal industry. Understanding the impact of being on the outside, Catherine has refocused her career to provide career coaching services to a diverse set of clients, some from unrepresented backgrounds. Catherine helps people to be their most confident self and achieve results based on their individual definition of success. Hear. How about that? And with that, we're so excited to have on the Lawyer Life podcast this morning, Catherine Chang. Hello, Catherine.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Darlene. I'm so happy to be here.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, we're so pumped to have you.
Oh, well, I'm really happy to be here. And this is a topic that I talk about a lot. So I'm looking forward to getting into it.
The idea of belonging is something, Catherine, you brought up, is one of the obstacles that people sort of overlook, that it's not just diversity and inclusion, it's diversity, inclusion, and belonging.
Absolutely. And first of all, I thought I'd talk about sort of what belonging means, and what it means to me. For me, it means being comfortable in my own skin. And a lot of that somehow has to do with connection and not feeling alone. Maybe when you're walking into a room, having people to speak to, knowing, generally, like having a general idea of what to expect. And, ultimately really not being afraid to share your thoughts or speak up. So I wonder, is that sort of what you think about as belonging also?
I think now, probably the most recent example of trying to carve out belonging for me, even though I am like a Caucasian woman, I'm often in situations where there aren't that many women in the room, particularly working with tech companies and in the music industry. It's not always not always a gender balanced environment. But then on the other interesting side, I also worked with an American company for a long time, and there was a certain, being the only Canadian in the room sometimes was its own form of difference that it took me a long time to understand how to kind of bridge some of the gaps in style in business and stuff like that. So those are my experiences. And I would say the way that I felt in those experiences was this need to kind of demonstrate that I knew what I was doing. It wasn't an assumption that I knew what I was doing. I had to prove it. And that was tough. And also just you feel a bit conspicuous, even though maybe you aren't. I don't know. But that would be my experience of it. And I'm sure that's a very minor experience compared to what others experience.
Well, I feel like that's a really good point, Darlene, because that is exactly how people describe it, right? Feeling conspicuous, feeling less confident. Often the things I hear is I just don't belong, or I feel like I don't belong. It's constant. And often it ends up with the I'm exhausted part, right? I'm just exhausted. And that's, and one of the things I think we should talk about is, systemic barriers that are facing a lot of people who are not the dominant group in a law firm, or especially in a big law firm. I want to make sure that we don't downplay that, there's, I don't know, many of your listeners have probably read Hadia's Black on Bay Street article, which talks a lot about those challenges, and the Law Society's report and recommendations also covered it a lot. But in terms of what we're going to talk about in belonging, I think it's more about the individual stories and why people come to me, how coaching can help them navigate this world that absolutely should be changed, and there need to be systemic changes. But until that happens, like, what do I do when I don't feel like I belong?
What do you tell them?
Yeah. So it's, first of all, a lot of it is being a safe space for them to talk about this for the first time. Because, I mean, think about your experiences in big firms when you had issues or you had concerns. And who would you speak to, right? Like often they, had some say over your work allocation or your reviews. And so the first thing is that a lot of people are like, I don't know who to go to talk about this. I'm having these feelings. It's often, it just keeps adding up. I'm dealing with every day. The impact of keeping silent is like affecting me emotionally. It's affecting me physically. It's creeping doubt. The replays in my head, like, did I really hear that? Why is that bothering me? Should I say something? Oh no, is it too late to say something? They didn't mean anything, just exhaustion.
Yes. I think one of the things is that I'm really relating to is that I think most people who've worked at a law firm or are starting out their career in law can relate to the feeling of not wanting to really, I mean, what you're talking about is kind of almost like a weakness. Like there's this couple of years at the beginning of your career where you want to, and you feel like you have to just be like, yep, got it.
Right.
Don't have any feelings. Don't have a life outside the office. Don't do anything but work. I've written about this in my blog. It's a form of artifice that affects everyone. And then on top of that, what you're talking about is an additional layer of stress that I would find, I think that's unimaginably stressful, actually.
And that's exactly it, right? Like that stress of not seeing anyone who looks like you, and then, or being called, for example, I've had Asian clients or Black clients who have been called the name of the only other Black or Asian lawyer. Being like there's one example I remember someone told me about, like the little things, right? That other people may think wouldn't impact you, but you're with another student and you run into a partner and the partner starts talking to the student beside you and saying, I saw your dad on the weekend, and them not even acknowledging you. Those little things, which is a microsecond and nobody else notices, right?
For folks who aren't underrepresented, especially the white men, I would say in our industry, especially, it's hard to understand the impact of those small things, I think. And I don't know, and I'll put this to you, maybe, Catherine. It kind of feels like to me the first time you meet your partner's parents and you go to their house and it's different and you feel like you're being observed in a different way and you have to be perfect. And you can't, like, at that dinner, you need to mind everything you're saying and channel it through this like family's culture, which is different from your family's culture. And every kind of response you get back, you analyze differently than you would if it was your own family. Is that kind of a way? And that's exhausting. You get home and you're tired.
It's exhausting.
From
it's
that,
like that,
from that
that
experience.
being hypersensitive, right? That being on edge, that being, oh my goodness, I can't let them see any of my flaws.
Right. And that's something that the unspoken things that exist in a firm or the firm's culture, that the culture basically forces the person to feel like they need to act that way, right? Like if I I find it interesting the example of I saw your dad on the weekend, or people at a firm talking about going golfing. If I came up in a culture or a family or an economic circumstance that we didn't golf, right? But instead, we cooked together, or we did another form of activity on the weekend. Automatically, I can't engage in that conversation.
That's right. And that's another really common thing you hear, like the talk about cottages and summer camp, and that feeling of I can't contribute, so I'm on the periphery, right?
And does anyone really like golf, or is it just like a thing that people feel compelled to talk about?
I think a lot of people love golf, Darlene.
I think they do. I know my dad would be included in that group. But anyway, I think that's it. It's like but all of this stuff is very insidious. And I think, I mean, even for me as I get older, I get a lot more comfortable with the idea that I can present the way that I am.
Right.
And that is a privilege, right? Like that's a real privilege. And I think it's something that Mike and I have spoken on a previous podcast about, building an architecture of empathy to deal with what other people are going through, and just be aware that other people may not have the same experience of you. That's like step one.
That is step one. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then you think about, if I didn't have the experience of feeling so uncomfortable in those early years, feeling like I had to present, but then I also had the experience of feeling, hey, that doesn't work for me,
Right.
and then I had the privilege on top of that of being able to be authentic without having, I mean, there have probably been consequences, but there are consequences I'm willing to accept, and I'm still able to live the life I lead and the career that I want to have. So,
and I love that you mentioned that privilege of being authentic, because I think that's something really important to realize. When people talk about the importance of things like authenticity and resilience and grit, and that it's a lot easier for some people, right?
Well, and I think the current firm, if you think about, the current law firm model, there are some for whom that's authentic. Like there are people who are presenting authentically at work, perhaps the discussion of golf and then going to court, and I don't know, whatever the example is for the specific firm. For some at the firm, that's authentic. I think where the problem comes in is that you feel, I don't know where this pressure comes from. I would be interested in your thoughts on, where does that pressure come from? Because certainly no one sits you down at the first day of a firm, and I've worked at 2 different law firms. No one says, okay, so the rule is you talk about golf, you act like this, you pretend that only work matters, you act like you don't have a life outside the office, etc., etc., etc. No one says that, but I think it's a pretty universal experience that that's what people think is expected of them. So where does that come from, do you think?
I think, and Mike, feel free to chime in, but I mean, I feel like there's a pretty strong dominant culture in law firms, which is white and male. And I mean, I know there are a lot of white males who don't ascribe to those, but this feeling of this is the way that you are successful, the way you're going to be successful, you're right, seems to be pretty universal, right? But changing, I would say.
I find that it's really hard to pin down what the definition is of a workplace culture. And the best I can determine it to be is, this is how we act and how we get things done, right? Like this is, and it's not spoken. I like, it's so hard, I think, to truly develop a culture based on the core values written on the wall or what have you, but it's actually day to day. What are the conversations and how do we work? And that ultimately, I totally agree, that's dictated by the people who are in charge. And I think that what folks who are in charge need to enable, I think if I was in that position, is certainly, yeah, if you're like somebody that's a senior partner and you golf on the weekend, fine. And you talk about it, I feel like you can't be silent on what you did on the weekend, but as well, draw out from others different things and be interested in those conversations and not prioritize your own. Could be something we work on. The only way cultures change is if actually the way that you work and the way that you talk changes as well. It's not about having a program or about a list of whatevers. It's a day-to-day small act thing. Is that fair to say, Catherine?
Yeah, I think a day-to-day, you're exactly right. Like the asking about people and the listening. Like, I mean, we've all been in those situations where somebody asks you a question and they're not listening to the answer, right? So, the asking about, like, how are you and how do you feel, and really listening. The making introductions to people, the making sure that people have real work with, and I mean, boy, this is getting into a big area of work allocation, but like, making sure that people get access to people who are decision makers, asking for input in meetings, paying attention. A big thing for me, one of them, I think, is like really just paying attention. And what does that mean in terms of, does it mean not checking your phone all the time? that type of thing. What I think that we're all aware of is that this is really hurtful and painful and really impacts confidence and work performance and emotional well-being. And that being aware of that is maybe a really great starting point.
I think those are great tips, and the small acts can make a big difference. I have not experienced really predominantly a lot of outsider scenarios in my life, but there's one example that I think works for me, and I have seen the impact of people reaching out in that scenario. So when I was in law school, one of my summer jobs was at Justice Canada, the Department of Justice, and I was assigned to work as part of this bilingualism committee. With the mandate, basically, this committee had the mandate of promoting bilingualism in the department and giving tangible outputs like how to run a meeting, one pagers and stuff like that, to ensure that both Anglophones and Francophones felt like they were equally involved and embraced and able to access materials and all that. So the funny thing is about that committee is everybody was a Francophone other than me. And the meetings occurred only in French, and the meeting minutes were only written in French. And I was functionally bilingual, but not hyper comfortable speaking French. So what I found was in those meetings, I spoke way less than normal. I deferred a ton. And really, I only participated when somebody kind of invited me to and opened up the window for me to participate in English by asking me, Mike, what do you think actually speaking in English and not in French?
Right.
Then I would. So that's a sort of example I think that we could maybe use as a metaphor for folks that don't understand a day-to-day life of being an unrepresented person. Of literally, like it's the same takeaways I think exist. It's almost as if you're speaking a different language.
Right.
Yeah.
And how important it was for you to have that window opened up. And, what are other ways perhaps, they could have made you feel more comfortable? What are ways that you wouldn't, have felt so, that deference or that unwillingness to speak up? And a lot of it to me, that confidence, that impact on confidence, right? It means that you take less risks. And often, honestly, that the reality is that we need to take risks to achieve. Like we have to stretch out of our comfort zone. And so when you're limited by that feeling, and I mean, I think I mentioned to Darlene, I went to this brain-based conversation skills course, which really talked a lot about the neuroscience of, and I mean, I could go on and on, and I can give you lots of reference stuff to add for the podcast, but how it actually affects the brain when you're under a threat state, and the fact that and we all know about fight or flight when there's physical threat to physical safety, but when there's threat to your social safety, and one of the pieces of that is relatedness and belonging, how does that impact your brain? And it was really fascinating to see in terms of that threat response decreases your perception, your cognition, your creativity, your collaboration, and so obviously decision making is affected, understanding recall. And in terms of law, I think it has huge consequences in terms of the ability to, a reduced ability to see issues, a reduced ability to solve, be a problem solver and work with others. And so I think this is really, really important for people to recognize that impact and think about ways that they can make their places more welcoming and a place of connection and belonging.
The idea of fitting in itself is like, okay, well, I think that maybe the idea of having to fit in to be successful is almost on its face something we should be questioning, because I would say I am an infinitely better lawyer now than I was when I was trying to do it like everybody else, because that's not where I'm my best. I'm my best when
you're bringing your strengths to it, right? You're bringing your real gifts and talents.
But I also think that as I continue to be more authentic to who I am, that's what gives me the interest in building a model that allows people to be who they are, because I do think it's a strength. I don't think this stuff is, a side issue. I think this is core, to your point, Catherine, to the the services that we give to clients. Like, are you able to be your best for your client? If not, why not? Right? That's why it's an issue for firms to deal with. Because if an associate is sitting there feeling like they don't belong, they're not getting the right work, they're getting work that is based on an assumption about them for some reason, gendered
and
or
imagine, Darlene, feeling it every single day.
Yeah, exhausting. My response would be, I think that the more we can create the understanding that being authentic is a strength, not a weakness.
Right.
Everyone benefits from that. And the more, honestly, I think that part of the reason, I think it's like, until everybody can be themselves, no one can be themselves. And I think that's even true for the privileged people who don't experience feeling like they're outsiders. They're also subject to this like drive to conform, right? Like, we don't know if they all like golf. We don't know that.
Right.
So if maybe they're subject to some pressure to conform.
I should mention, I was just thinking about how one client described her feeling to me. And she said it was like losing herself, becoming quieter, less confident, unhappier. And what she noticed was the unhappiness was at work and also at home, because she felt like that life was just happening to her and she'd lost control. And that was, I thought, a really powerful and disheartening way to describe it.
That is disheartening.
Yeah. So back to what can we do about it, right? In terms of, is that there's a real need, as we talked about a little bit earlier, about real need for a safe space to unpack the complicated feelings that go with the feeling of not belonging. Mm-hmm. And that includes a place without judgment, focusing on solutions that work for that person, that individual, knowing that it's not one size fits all, that it's about that, the individual's needs, their values, their triggers. And when people feel that others at work are responsible for work assignments and evaluations, they often remain silent and don't speak up. And so we have to recognize all of that.
It's so funny. Like, no matter what the issue is that we talk about on this podcast, one major theme that comes through is recognizing individual needs. And it just seems like, I know this is occurring in like healthcare and in so many other places, that applying a de facto standard across a group of people is something that we no longer need to do anymore, and we can get better. We have ways of customizing to individuals in a number of different ways, and this is another example of that. I feel like this applies to building a sort of work environment for an individual in which they thrive, and that makes the individual better. Like, we talk about having flexible time for people to work or work from home arrangements. Like, this is I'll say the same part of the conversation of how can we make sure that you as an individual are the most comfortable, are thriving, are, feel like you can be yourself while you deliver great service. Right. So that's, I feel like oftentimes the second somebody hears, especially somebody in a power position, hears, mention of belonging, or I feel on the outside, or talking, especially if that comes from an underrepresented person, I feel like the door is shut so quickly because it is not looked at as a substantive issue. And that's a terrible thing. What should occur is that this is about the person that's in front of you, and how do you make sure that the person in front of you that is under your employ or works in your workplace can be the best person and happiest person they are, while also delivering the best service or product that they're meant to in their job. And so I think focusing on the individual is such a powerful point, because
and the one thing too is, how do you lean into your discomfort? Because often people don't want to have those conversations, right? Because they're like, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing, or I don't want, but opening yourself up, being vulnerable, and I think that's so important too.
And it takes so little, listening is very low risk. Like, can I just say that?
Really listening.
You don't have to you don't have to talk if you feel uncomfortable with the topic. If you're a person who doesn't know what it's like to be underrepresented, you can still engage in a conversation by opening up that conversation and just drawing out more information with open-ended questions. You don't have to do anything else. Tell me what that feels like. Tell me more about that. Like, it's not rocket science.
Right. Opening yourself up, right? Opening yourself up to new experiences and to learning about people. Seems so basic.
And also just just catching yourself when you have a judgment. Like, I was at an event last night and they had, as part of their office, which tech companies are all over, they do lots of interesting things. But at this particular office, there was a beer tap installed that's just always there and always alcohol around. And I thought to myself, like, if you had a problem with alcohol, this would not be a workplace that you'd want to work in. And there would be some stigma attached to being like, oh, I'm the person that doesn't drink, because that's the culture of this environment. But like, if someone said, I don't drink, quickly, what's your assumption? Is your assumption that they might have a problem with it and they're making a healthy choice for them? Or is your assumption that they're a stick in the mud? Right? And that's just the judgment. Like, the person needs to be supported and the judgment needs to go. And I think becoming aware of when you're making a judgment, even if it's a valid one versus an invalid one, is really helpful and is like the first step. Because some people are like, oh, my judgment is a fact. No, it's not. It's just your thought.
Yeah, having perspective, right? And being aware of others, like, important on both sides, I think.
Good wrap up. Sorry. Having perspective on both sides. I like it. But Mike, is that a good summary?
Of course.
It's really interesting that advice is great, but often real learning and real change in behavior comes from within, and that's what I try to do with a lot of my clients, is really try to facilitate the coaching, having safe and powerful discussions where people can say their inner thoughts out loud, sometimes for the first time, and often surprising themselves. So really supporting people to try on new thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and really trying on new thinking, like, so reflection, a lot of stuff about, confidence that we talk about, growth mindset. I'm sure you guys have mentioned on some of your podcasts, Carol Dweck's growth mindset, Stefan, we can, the passion for stretching yourself and sticking to it, even or especially when it's not going well, is the hallmark of a growth mindset. This is a mindset that allows people to thrive in challenging times. That's one of her quotes from her book, Mindset. Talking about emotional regulation, which is so important. Again, you could do podcasts on that. Self-compassion, so important, right? And so examining your assumptions, your choices, your priorities, your values, your motivation, your triggers, focusing on your strengths, your past successes, all of those things I think are so important for people to move forward, to take action, and to help them, like, achieve real results for them.
Well, and what we're trying to do on this podcast is create a culture in which, and in my blog too, but, create a culture in which people are talking about these things very honestly and authentically, because I think there has been too long where everyone's scared to talk about it. But at some point, someone has to talk about it. And it's not just in a comfortable way, because comfortable conversations usually don't move the needle.
Well, Catherine, thank you so much for this great conversation. I think there's a lot of practical things that we can take away. And for folks that are in a power position and can change things, I think there's a lot for them to do. But as well, I think even at minimum, we can look at our colleagues and people that are lateral to us and try to help them out if we do see that they might not feel a total sense of belonging. And that can make a big impact on them as well.
Absolutely.
Good summary.
Great. So with that, we'll go to break and we'll be back with our goods and gripes. The Lawyer Life podcast is brought to you by Inter Alia Law, experienced legal counsel when and where you need us. To learn more about Inter Alia, visit the website. That's spelled INTERALIA-law.com. Thank you. And we are back with our goods and gripes. Goods are things we want to promote and support. Gripes are things that annoy us. Darlene, do you want to start? Do you have a good or gripe?
I thought that this whole week was good.
Wow.
Yeah, good. I really enjoy the
Darlene's
summer.
personal week.
Darlene's week is my good. Um, yeah, I think that you know what, one good. I went to an event last night that was all solo and small firm proprietors interacting and talking about business and talking about how we can help each other and um, cooperate on ways of bringing positive change to the profession. Good. That's a real
Awesome.
good. I really enjoyed that. And I love that in many ways we compete with, I mean, some of us have competitive law firms, but it doesn't matter in that space. There's enough for everyone. It's a matter of helping and being a resource to each other. And it's so supportive. And I just love that. I think it's great. How about Mike? Do you want to go with your good?
I have to go with the Toronto Raptors again. This is so much fun. Up 2-1. But you want to talk about belonging. I think that's one thing that people actually are focusing on. The media is focusing on the focus on Toronto, the diverse set of fan base, how everybody seems to be getting along quite well in the celebrations. It's like there's an incredibly diverse set of Raptors fans. Everybody's so coming together around this. It's so much fun. It's just fun. It's pure fun, and I love it. And one thing, speaking about somebody who might have been a bit too comfortable, have you saw this? One of the partial owners and board members of the Warriors pushed a Raptor who came into the stands.
Yeah.
Maybe he felt a little bit too comfortable in his surroundings, and maybe you can see how that would be from a power position, a negative thing. So folks who feel really comfortable where they're at, maybe you can overstep sometimes, like this guy did. He's out $500,000. He's banned, I think, from being at an NBA game for a year, and he's the villain of the series now, as he should be. So
he should be. I agree, and I was actually shocked it's only a year. And you stole my good, Mike, because I'm a huge Raptors fan. Another commonality we have, because I'm the biggest fan. Anyone that knows me, it's so I'm really pumped.
Well, there you go. So we both have Jamaican backgrounds. We both have ties to the Golden Horseshoe area, and we both are huge Raptors fans. We need to get together, Catherine.
We do. Absolutely.
Excellent. Do you have a gripe, Catherine?
I have a constant gripe that is even now that the weather's a little bit warmer. I'm a dog owner, and I'm just so angry at people who won't pick up their dog poop. That's my constant gripe.
Bravo.
It's almost like Mike could have helped you write that gripe. That's a Mike style gripe. Yes. Yeah. That's a good one. That's a really good one.
Great. That's great.
Mike, you go.
I have 2 gripes. One is actually a self gripe. It's a gripe about myself. I'll start there. In the last episode, we talked about lawyers with kids, and I re-listened to it after recording, and I realized I made a presumption at one point that every couple is made of a man and a woman, and I want to gripe at myself for that. I'm sorry, that is not the case, and I feel bad about that. So that's my self gripe. Gripe, and then general gripe. You brought it up earlier, and I talked about this with a guy on my hockey team on Monday night. That my gripe is about the cool workplaces with the beer tap or the ping pong table. No one cares. People don't care about that, really. It looks good on your website, but in the end, do you treat people well? Do you compensate them properly? Is it a positive workplace? That is way more important, especially now as benefits programs are running out and so on and so forth. I think that we get a bit too caught up in the ping pong table, and that's my gripe.
Okay, you're not a ping pong fan. All other sports, but no ping pong.
No flashy. Stop.
I challenge you to a ping pong game, Mike.
Oh my God.
Well, you will definitely win.
I think that was kind of along the lines of what my gripe is. I'm actually just, it goes with this idea that work means a certain thing. And I think every industry has that. And in the tech industry, it is sometimes like we work hard, we play hard, right? Like we have the ping pong table so that we're here and can take a break. And but the assumption is kind of we're always here. That's why we don't drink during the workday. That's not what the beer tap's for. It's for after. And we're going to be here, right? Like hanging with the people we work with. So I think that for me, work has a place and outside of work has a place. And I'd like to have people feel the freedom. I mean, there's a strong element of freedom on this podcast, but I think the world will benefit when everyone has a bit more freedom to be themselves. And that's part of it. It's like one person's idea of the company they want to build is as follows. That doesn't mean that everyone else has to feel like they have to pretend they like ping pong. I agree. Right? I guess the point is this exists everywhere. It just takes a different form. So grape it up. That was a couple of good grapes, but also, yes, it's an exciting time to be in Toronto, and it's cool to see.
Go Raps.
Go Raps.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll update on we don't need to update. Everyone knows what's going on with the Raptors.
You're going to listen to the Lawyer Life podcast in a week,
for
week or 2 from now late. To understand how the Raptors did. No spoilers, everybody. I'm waiting for the lawyers to tell me.
It's going to be very good. It's going to really up our podcasting game. Anyway, thank you so much, Catherine. This has been really, really great having you. And it's an important voice. And we really appreciate you bringing the perspective that we don't necessarily have. And we want to share with people and just let people know what you're doing too, because I think it's a really important service that you're offering. And just the perspective that you have from working in the industry and then helping people navigate it with your lenses is very valuable. So thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with both of you.
Put Catherine's contact information in our show notes so everybody can understand how to reach out to her. Did we do it?
We did it.
Okay, cool. We'll talk soon.
Talk soon.
That's it for this week's episode of LLP. Thanks to Inter Alia Law for presenting the podcast and to Nick Fowler for composing and performing our music. See our show notes for his website. Don't forget, we love feedback. Please comment in the review section or subscribe or like. We'd appreciate it greatly. That's it. Talk soon.